am Genevieve, 35 years old, an interior designer from Boston, with what I thought was a perfect marriage. Tonight, James and I are celebrating our 10-year anniversary at La Maison, the expensive French restaurant where he proposed. As the waiter pours our champagne, I notice James checking his phone again. His confession over the main course shatters everything. But what he doesn't know is that I've been prepared for weeks. If you're watching this from a place where you've been betrayed, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments. Let's get into what happened when my perfect marriage shattered over lobster thermidor. I met James during my sophomore year of college. I was studying interior design, and he was in the finance program. We literally bumped into each other at the campus coffee shop, sending my portfolio samples flying everywhere. As he helped gather my sketches, our hands touched, and there was this instant connection. His blue eyes crinkled when he smiled, and I remember thinking he looked like a young Robert Redford. Our first date was at a tiny Italian restaurant just off campus. We talked until the owner had to politely ask us to leave because they were closing. James was ambitious, but funny, without being cruel. He listened when I spoke about my dreams of having my own design firm one day, really listened in a way no one else ever had. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. The proposal was at La Maison, the same restaurant where he would later confess his affair. Symmetry can be cruel sometimes. He had arranged with the staff to bring out a custom dessert with the ring in the center of a chocolate sphere that melted when the waiter poured hot caramel over it. Everyone in the restaurant applauded. I cried. It was perfect. Our wedding was everything I had dreamed of. My father walked me down the aisle in the church where I'd grown up. 200 guests watched as we exchanged vows. My dress was a vintage-inspired lace gown that I'd helped design. James teared up when he saw me, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. After the wedding, we settled into our life together. We bought our first house, a fixer-upper colonial in a nice Boston suburb. I spent weekends stripping wallpaper and refinishing hardwood floors while James worked on the yard and learned basic plumbing. We made that house our own room by room. James worked his way up at Bradbury Financial while I built my client list as a designer. By our 5th anniversary, we were both doing well. I had landed several high-profile clients, and James had been promoted to senior investment manager. We bought a larger home in a better neighborhood and took luxury vacations twice a year. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple. My sister Lauren would constantly say how she wanted a marriage just like ours. Our friends would joke that we were still like newlyweds even after years together. We hosted dinner parties where James would tell the story of how we met, and I would catch his eye across the room and feel that same flutter I'd felt back in college. But perfection is often just good lighting, and careful staging something I know well from my design work. The first tiny fracture appeared around year 7. The physical side of our relationship began to cool. James started working later hours, sometimes not coming home until I was already asleep. He said it was a big new client that the extra work would mean a substantial bonus. I believed him. By our 8th anniversary, the distance between us had grown. James was traveling more for work weekend conferences and client meetings in other cities. He still brought me gifts from these trips, still kissed me hello and goodbye, but something was different. The passion that had always been effortless now required work. Sometimes when we made love, it felt like he was somewhere else. I started noticing other things too. How he would take his phone with him everywhere, even to shower. How he would step outside to take certain calls. How sometimes he smelled different when he came home, not like another perfume exactly, but like he had showered somewhere else. For our 9th anniversary, James gave me diamond earrings. They were beautiful, but later I found a receipt in his suit jacket for a different jewelry store than the one on the earrings box. I never received whatever he bought there. The receipt was for a necklace that cost more than the earrings. I told myself I was being paranoid. James loved me. We had built this life together. We were planning to start trying for a baby in the new year. He had just supported me through launching my own design studio after years of freelancing. Why would he risk everything? Now I remember sitting with my friend Amelia at lunch about 6 months before our 10th anniversary. She asked me how things were with James, and I gave my usual answer about how busy we both were, but how good things were. She gave me an odd look and asked if everything was really okay. I insisted it was. She dropped it, but I could tell she wanted to say more. Looking back now, I realize how many signs I missed or chose to ignore. The weekend trips that extended by a day. The credit card statements with charges for restaurants on nights he said he was working late. The sudden interest in keeping fit and buying new clothes. The classic signs were all there, but I didn't want to see them. After all, we were Genevieve and James, the perfect couple, the ones who had it all figured out, the ones others looked up to. How could that image be anything but real? The first real sign that something was wrong came on the night of my design award ceremony. I had been nominated for a prestigious industry award, and the ceremony was on a Thursday evening. James had promised to be there. I saved him a seat at my table. I even texted him the time again that morning to make sure he remembered. The ceremony started, and his seat remained empty. I kept checking my phone, thinking he would at least text to say he was running late. Nothing. I accepted my award alone, thanking my amazing supportive husband in my speech, even as I felt humiliation burning my cheeks. When I returned to my seat, I had a text from him claiming an emergency client meeting had come up. He was sorry. He would make it up to me. 2 weeks later, my parents were in town, and we had planned a dinner together. James was 2 hours late again, claiming work had kept him. My father, always protective, asked me privately if everything was okay with James. I defended him, explaining how demanding his job was even as doubt gnawed at me. Then came the morning I was doing laundry and found a long blonde hair on his dress shirt. I don't have blonde hair. I told myself it could belong to anyone, a coworker, someone who brushed against him on the subway. But deep down, I knew. The perfume incident was harder to rationalize. I have a sensitive nose, part of why I'm good at my job, understanding how spaces affect all the senses. The scent on his collar was floral, but with a woody undertone. Expensive. Not mine. When I asked him about it casually, he explained that their new office manager wore strong perfume and had helped him organize some files that day. A reasonable explanation. I almost believed it. Our intimate life had changed too. Where once we could barely keep our hands off each other, now weeks would pass without any physical connection. When we did make love, it felt mechanical, like he was going through motions. He often claimed stress or fatigue. I started to wonder if he found me attractive anymore, even though I knew I looked good. I began to spend more time on my appearance, thinking perhaps I had let myself go somehow without realizing it. One night, I tried to surprise him with lingerie and candles when he got home from work. He seemed almost irritated by the gesture, claiming he had a headache and just wanted to sleep. I cried in the bathroom after he went to bed, careful to be silent. The business trips increased in frequency. Chicago, New York, San Francisco, London. Sometimes for a client pitch, sometimes for a conference. Always necessary, always unavoidable. I stopped being invited to join him even when they were in exciting locations. He said the schedules were too packed for me to enjoy myself. When I would text him during these trips, his responses would come hours later. Short replies, no detail about what he was doing or who he was with. When I would ask to FaceTime before bed, he would claim the hotel Wi-Fi was terrible or that he was still in meetings. I noticed he had changed passwords on his phone and laptop, claiming it was a new company security policy. His phone was always face down when he set it on surfaces. If it rang while he was in the shower, he would call out asking me who it was, but would never ask me to answer it. My friend Amelia finally said what I had been afraid to acknowledge. We were having coffee, and she hesitated before telling me she had seen James having lunch with a young blonde woman at a restaurant downtown. They had seemed very friendly, she said carefully. Too friendly. James had his hand on hers at one point. When Amelia approached their table to say hello, she said James had looked like he'd seen a ghost. When I confronted him that evening, he had an explanation ready. She was a new junior analyst on his team. He was mentoring her. Amelia had misinterpreted a professional lunch. He seemed so genuine in his indignation that I apologized for doubting him. But that night, I noticed him texting someone while he thought I was asleep. The internal conflict was exhausting. Part of me wanted to trust the man I had loved for a decade. The other part was screaming that something was wrong. I started having trouble sleeping, lost my appetite, found it hard to focus on work. My assistant commented that I seemed distracted, which wasn't like me. One evening, while James was supposedly working late, I drove by his office on my way home from a client meeting. The lights were off on his floor. His car wasn't in the parking garage. When he came home at 11, he talked about how productive his evening had been at the office. I said nothing, just watched him lie to my face with perfect sincerity. That was when I decided I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. I called a private investigator the next day, a woman named Sandra Thompson, who specialized in infidelity cases. It felt surreal giving her James's information, his schedule, his habits, like I was betraying him somehow. But I needed to know. While the investigation was underway, I maintained our normal routine. I kissed him goodbye in the mornings, prepared his favorite meals, listened to his stories about work, all while feeling like I was living in a simulation of my real life. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending I didn't notice when he came home smelling of unfamiliar soap. Pretending I believed him when he said he had to work on our anniversary weekend. Pretending I was asleep when he checked his phone at 3 a.m. The toll it took was immense. I lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks. I started seeing a therapist, secretly needing somewhere to unload the anxiety and fear. I told no one else, not even my sister, ashamed somehow, as if his potential infidelity was my failure. 2 weeks after hiring Sandra Thompson, she called to say she had preliminary findings to discuss. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, far from anywhere James or his colleagues might go. When I saw her face, I knew before she spoke. She had found something. Sandra opened a folder and slid it across the table to me. Inside were photos of James with a young blonde woman, entering a hotel together, his hand on the small of her back. Coming out hours later, his tie loosened her hair mussed. Other photos showed them at restaurants, sitting close, fingers intertwined. In one, they were kissing in his car. I felt physically ill looking at them, but I couldn't stop. In each photo, James looked happy, relaxed. There was one where he was laughing at something she said, his head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. Sandra's report was comprehensive. The woman was Melissa Carter, 28 years old, a financial analyst who had joined James's firm 14 months earlier. Their affair appeared to have begun shortly after following a company retreat in the Berkshires. Sandra had documented 12 hotel meetings in the past month alone, always during James's supposed late nights at the office. There were also 2 weekend trips where he had claimed to be at conferences but had actually taken Melissa to a bed and breakfast on Cape Cod. I asked Sandra if she had any information about what James had told Melissa about me or our marriage. She hesitated before showing me screenshots of social media messages her team had obtained. In them, James told Melissa that we were effectively separated, living together in name only, until we figured out the financial aspects of divorce. He claimed I was difficult, controlling, career-obsessed, that I didn't understand him like she did, that he had never felt about anyone the way he felt about her. I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour after Sandra left, unable to drive, unable to process what I had learned. The betrayal wasn't just the physical infidelity. It was the systematic dismantling of our history together, the reframing of our marriage as something broken and loveless to justify his actions. When I could finally drive, I didn't go home. I went to my studio and buried myself in work details, unable to face James yet. I needed to think to plan. Confronting him while in this raw state of shock would give him the upper hand. And one thing was clear from Sandra's evidence: James was a skilled liar who had been managing this double life for over a year, without raising serious suspicion. That evening, I made an excuse about a client emergency to explain my distraction. I studied James across the dinner table, this man I had shared my life with, searching for signs of the person I thought I knew. He asked about my day with what seemed like genuine interest, told a funny story about something that happened at work, kissed me before going to bed, all while having spent the afternoon in a hotel with another woman, according to the timestamps on Sandra's photos. The next day, I followed the paper trail. I went through our financial records methodically, looking for evidence I had missed. There it was, a credit card I didn't know about, statements sent to his office, hotel charges, jewelry purchases, restaurants far more expensive than he would normally choose, weekend getaways disguised as conferences. The documentation of betrayal spread across our home office desk, in neat columns of numbers. A week after meeting with Sandra, James made a critical mistake. He left his phone unlocked when he went to shower. I had never snooped before, believing that trust was fundamental, but that trust had been violated repeatedly. I picked up the phone. There were hundreds of text messages between him and Melissa. Pet names, inside jokes, plans for their next meeting, complaints about having to attend functions with me, discussions about their future together, explicit messages that made me physically recoil. Photos I can never unsee. Most devastating were the messages about an apartment they had looked at together the previous weekend when James had told me he was golfing with clients. Messages about how it would be their first real place together, how soon they could make the move permanent, how James just needed to find the right time to finally end things with me, preferably after the Henderson client contract was finalized, since my design work was involved. I learned more about Melissa Carter, too. 28, originally from Seattle, graduated from Wharton. She had joined James's firm as part of their elite analyst program. From her messages, it appeared she genuinely believed I was the villain in this scenario, the soon-to-be ex-wife who was unreasonably prolonging the inevitable for financial reasons. She was not the predator I had imagined, but rather another victim of James's elaborate lies. I took photos of key messages with my own phone before carefully returning his to exactly where he had left it. Then I drove to a park and finally allowed myself to break down completely. I screamed until my voice gave out. I cried until there were no tears left. I hit the steering wheel until my hands ached. When the storm passed, a strange calm settled over me. The uncertainty was gone. Now I knew. And knowledge, even painful knowledge, is power. I called the best divorce attorney in Boston the next morning, a shark named Brian Williams, who was known for his aggressive approach to protecting his clients' interests. I made an appointment for that afternoon, claiming a client site visit to explain my absence. In Brian's office, I laid out everything I had learned. He was clinical strategic, explained how Massachusetts law would apply to our case. He advised me not to confront James yet, to gather more financial information first to protect myself before showing my hand. We discussed the timing. I mentioned that our 10th anniversary was approaching, that James had made reservations at La Maison, the restaurant where we got engaged. A plan began to form. Not just a divorce strategy, but a moment of reckoning that would give me back some of the power James had stolen through his deception. As Brian outlined next steps, I felt something unfamiliar rising within me. Not just anger or hurt, but a steely resolve. James had rewritten our story without my consent. Now I would write the final chapter on my own terms. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a methodical planner of my own liberation. By day, I maintained the facade of normalcy, playing the role of devoted wife, while James continued his charade of devoted husband. By night, I prepared for the end of my marriage with the same attention to detail I would give to designing a showcase home. My first priority was financial security. I went through all our accounts documenting balances and transactions. I made copies of tax returns, property records, investment portfolios. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state, which meant assets would be divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. Brian advised me to be thorough. I opened a new bank account at a different bank than the ones we used jointly. I deposited a reasonable amount from my personal earnings, careful not to cross the line into hiding assets, which could hurt me in court. I updated my business accounts to remove James as an authorized user, something I had added years ago for convenience but now recognized as vulnerability. I gathered all my personal financial documents and irreplaceable items, jewelry from my grandmother, childhood photographs, professional awards, and stored them at my sister Lauren's house under the guise of organizing for a design portfolio shoot. I made digital copies of important documents and stored them in a secure cloud account James couldn't access. The legal preparation was extensive. Brian and I worked on the divorce, filing a comprehensive document outlining grounds for divorce, division of assets, and financial support considerations. We documented James's affair meticulously, including Sandra's evidence and the financial records showing how he had spent marital assets on Melissa. In Massachusetts, adultery can be considered in property division if it can be shown that marital assets were used to support the affair. James had spent thousands of our dollars on hotel rooms, gifts, and trips with Melissa. This strengthened my position considerably. While the legal machinery was in motion, I also prepared for the emotional aftermath. I started seeing Dr. Catherine Reed, a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma, twice weekly. In her office, I could drop the mask of composure I wore everywhere else. I could rage, weep, question every decision I had made in the past decade. Dr. Reed helped me process the grief while preparing for what would come next. I finally confided in my sister Lauren, whose guest house became my planned refuge after the confrontation. Her righteous anger on my behalf was validating. I swore her to secrecy, explaining the importance of James not suspecting anything before I was ready. My best friend Amelia became another pillar of support. She had tried to warn me, had seen what I refused to see. There was no satisfaction in her when I confirmed her suspicions, only compassion and offers of help. She helped me pack emergency bags to store at her house, researched apartments for when I would need my own place, and promised to be available whenever I needed her after the confrontation. The most delicate part of the plan was the anniversary dinner arrangement. I contacted Michel, the manager at La Maison, whom I knew from designing his home the previous year. I explained my situation in vague terms, saying only that I needed to give my husband important papers during our anniversary dinner. Michel, a romantic Frenchman with a theatrical streak, immediately grasped what I was implying and became an enthusiastic accomplice. We arranged for the divorce papers to be delivered to the restaurant earlier that day. They would be placed on a silver dessert tray and covered with a silver dome to be brought out when I gave the signal for the special dessert. Michel suggested the restaurant's private alcove for our table, providing both privacy and strategic position where I could exit easily. But James would be somewhat trapped against the wall. As the anniversary approached, I rehearsed my reaction and words countless times. I stood before my bathroom mirror, practicing keeping my expression neutral when James would inevitably confess. I crafted the exact words I would say when the papers were revealed, wanting them to be memorable, impactful, but dignified. This wasn't about creating a scene, but about reclaiming my narrative. The day before our anniversary, I experienced my only real moment of doubt. For a brief hour, I considered canceling everything, trying to talk to James, seeing if there was anything left to salvage. I called Dr. Reed, who helped me recognize this as a normal grief response, the bargaining stage. She reminded me of the evidence, the duration of the betrayal, the calculated nature of James's deception. By the end of our call, my resolve had returned. The morning of our anniversary, James gave me a gift, before leaving for work, a pair of sapphire earrings that matched my eyes. He said, The card expressed his love and gratitude for 10 wonderful years. I accepted both with a smile, thinking of the jewelry receipt I had found months earlier, wondering if these had been purchased as guilt offerings, or if there was a matching necklace somewhere on Melissa's dresser. I spent extra time getting ready that evening, not for James, but for myself. I chose a deep blue dress that made me feel powerful, applied my makeup with precision, styled my hair in an elegant updo. I looked into my own eyes in the mirror and made a promise to the woman staring back that by midnight she would no longer be living a lie. La Maison was exactly as I remembered it from our engagement night, all warm lighting and gleaming silverware, the soft murmur of conversation and the clink of fine crystal, creating that particular atmosphere of luxury that feels both intimate and performative. The maitre d' greeted us by name, congratulating us on our anniversary. James had his hand on the small of my back, the same gesture I had seen in photos of him with Melissa. I wondered if he realized he used the same touch with both of us, or if it was unconscious, this physical expression of possession. We were led to the alcove table. Michelle had arranged a perfect spot with privacy, but a clear path to the exit. James commented on the romantic setting, seemed pleased by the special treatment. He ordered champagne, an expensive vintage, and toasted to 10 perfect years and many more to come. I smiled and sipped, noting the irony of paying for this extravagant meal with the same credit card he had used to book hotel rooms with Melissa. Throughout the appetizers, James seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly, despite the restaurant's elegant atmosphere calling for more discretion. I wondered if he was texting Melissa, if she knew he was out with his wife tonight, if she was waiting for updates. I kept the conversation light, discussing mutual friends, a new restaurant opening in our neighborhood, an upcoming exhibit at the museum. James participated, but I could sense his mind was elsewhere. There was a tension in his shoulders, a slight furrow in his brow that came and went. We ordered the lobster thermidor, La Maison's specialty, the same dish we had eaten the night James proposed. I asked him about work, about the Henderson contract that was supposedly the reason he was delaying ending our marriage, according to his texts with Melissa. He talked at length about the project, completely unaware that I knew of its significance beyond the professional. As our main courses arrived, James's demeanor shifted subtly. He took a large sip of wine, then another. Set his glass down with slightly too much force. Cleared his throat twice. I recognized the signs of someone preparing to say something difficult. "Genevieve," he began, his voice lower than normal. "I need to tell you something." I set down my fork, carefully arranged my face into a neutral expression of concern, and waited. This was it, the moment when James would finally tell some version of the truth, unaware that I already knew a far more complete version than whatever edited reality he was about to present. "I've been seeing someone else." His eyes darted to my face, then away, then back. Watching for my reaction, gauging how to proceed based on my response. I remained silent, my expression unchanged, which seemed to unnerve him. "Her name is Melissa. She works at the firm." He took another sip of wine. "It started as just friendship, but it's become more serious than that." I noticed he didn't mention when it started, didn't acknowledge the 14 months of deception, was already minimizing, reframing. "I didn't mean for it to happen. You and I, we've grown apart. You're so focused on your career, and we want different things now." He was shifting blame now, creating a narrative where our marriage was already failing, where his infidelity was almost inevitable, perhaps even justified. "I care about you, Genevieve. I always will. But Melissa and I, we have a connection I can't ignore anymore." His expression was pained, but determined. He had rehearsed this, I realized. Had probably practiced with Melissa, refining his speech to sound sincere but firm. "I was going to wait until after the Henderson project was complete to tell you, but I couldn't go through with this anniversary dinner without being honest." He reached across the table for my hand. I think we need to separate to figure out what a fair settlement looks like. I've already spoken with an attorney about options. The audacity was breathtaking. The careful construction of half-truths, the presentation of his betrayal as an act of honesty, the implication that he was being noble by telling me now when in reality he had been caught in a moment of guilt that would pass as quickly as it had come. I looked at him, this stranger, wearing my husband's face, and felt a strange sense of clarity. The shock and pain I had felt upon first discovering his affair had burned away, leaving only clear-eyed purpose. "I see," I said simply. My calm response seemed to confuse him. He had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps even a scene. My composure left him off balance. "You're not surprised?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Let's have dessert before we discuss this further." I signaled to the waiter hovering discreetly nearby. "We're ready for the special dessert now." James looked confused. "I didn't order any special dessert." "I did," I replied. Michel himself appeared moments later, carrying a covered silver tray with theatrical flourish. "Madame, Monsieur, for your anniversary, a very special presentation." He set the tray between us with a small bow. James looked bewildered, but attempted a smile, clearly thinking this was some romantic gesture I had planned before his confession, making him feel even more guilty. With a practiced movement, Michel lifted the dome to reveal not a dessert, but a thick stack of legal documents, the words "petition for divorce" clearly visible on the top page. James's hands actually trembled as he stared at the papers. His face drained of color, then flushed red. His mouth opened and closed without sound. "I've known about Melissa for months, James," I said evenly. "I know about the hotel on Boylston where you meet her Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know about the weekend in Cape Cod when you said you were at a conference in Chicago. I know about the apartment you looked at together last month that you planned to move into after leaving me." His eyes widened with each revelation. I continued, my voice steady and clear. "I know you've been telling her we're separated in all but legality. I know you've characterized me as difficult and career-obsessed. I know you've spent over $20,000 of our money on hotels, gifts, and trips with her." I picked up the glass of water beside my wine, took a small sip. "I know everything, James. I have documented everything, and now my attorney knows everything too." James seemed to find his voice at last. "You had me investigated." Outrage colored his tone, the audacity of painting himself as the victim stunning even to me. "Yes, I did. After finding jewelry receipts for items I never received. After Amelia saw you holding hands with Melissa downtown. After you missed my awards ceremony for a client emergency that turned out to be a hotel rendezvous." I gestured to the papers. "Everything is there. Division of assets, financial disclosures, evidence of how you've spent marital assets on your affair. My attorney assures me it's quite comprehensive." James switched tactics, his expression softening into contrition. "Genevieve, this isn't how I wanted this to happen. We can talk about this at home, work through it together without attorneys. You caught me at a weak moment with Melissa, but what we have is worth fighting for." It was fascinating watching him recalibrate in real time, moving from confession to damage control when he realized I had the upper hand. "There's nothing to discuss, James. You've been living a double life for over a year. You've lied to me every single day. You've spent our money pursuing another relationship while maintaining the fiction of our marriage." I stood, gathering my clutch. "You can keep the reservation, the meal, and of course the bill. Consider it your first alimony payment." I could feel eyes from nearby tables, patrons trying to appear not to be listening while absorbing every word. James was acutely aware of this too, his face a mask of barely controlled panic at the public nature of this revelation. "My things will be moved out by tomorrow afternoon. You can reach me through my attorney going forward." I placed my wedding rings on top of the divorce papers. The platinum band and diamond solitaire that had once represented such hope now just symbols of an elaborate deception. James grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. "You can't do this," he hissed, his composure finally cracking. "You're making a scene. This is embarrassing." I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. Then I leaned close and delivered the final line I had rehearsed so carefully. "What's embarrassing, James, is that you thought you could manage 2 relationships indefinitely without consequences. What's embarrassing is that you're more concerned with how this looks than the pain you've caused. What's embarrassing is that you still think you get to control this situation." I straightened, adjusted my dress, and nodded to Michelle, who was watching from a discreet distance. "I wish you and Melissa happiness," I said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I hope she enjoys the apartment you toured together, and I sincerely hope she never has reason to doubt you the way I did." With that, I walked out of La Maison with my head high, leaving James staring after me, the divorce papers spread before him on the table where he had once proposed. The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside La Maison, and with it came the first real wave of emotion since James's confession. I made it to my car before the tears started hot and fast, blurring my vision as I gripped the steering wheel. They weren't tears of sadness exactly, but of release. The culmination of months of suspicion, weeks of planning, and years of a relationship that had been built on shifting sand. I sat there for 20 minutes, letting the emotions wash over me. Grief for the marriage I thought I had, anger at James's betrayal, relief at finally being free of the lies, pride in how I had handled myself, fear of what came next. All of it churning together in a storm that had been building for months. When I could see clearly again, I drove to Lauren's house as planned. She was waiting up, a bottle of wine open, ready to be whatever I needed. I recounted the evening in detail, from James's rehearsed confession to his stunned face when the divorce papers appeared. Lauren alternated between righteous anger on my behalf and practical questions about next steps. By the time I went to bed in her guest room, I felt steadier. My phone had been silenced, but when I checked it before sleep, there were 17 missed calls from James, along with a stream of text messages ranging from apologetic to angry to pleading. I forwarded them all to Brian without reading most of them, then blocked James's number. Any communication could go through our attorneys now. The next morning, Lauren went with me to our house during the time I knew James would be at work. I had arranged for movers to pack my personal belongings and essential items I would need immediately. It felt surreal walking through the home we had shared, selecting what to take and what to leave, knowing I would never live there again. I left James a brief note on the kitchen counter, stating that I had taken only my personal possessions and that all joint property would be addressed in the divorce proceedings. I also left my key. As I closed the door behind me for the last time, I felt another wave of emotion, but also a strange sense of lightness. James's attempts at reconciliation began that evening. He sent flowers to Lauren's house, though how he knew I was there, I couldn't guess. The card begged for a chance to explain to make things right. I asked Lauren to donate the flowers to a nearby nursing home. Next came the email's long emotional appeals, claiming he had made a terrible mistake, that Melissa meant nothing, that our marriage was worth saving. Each one revealed more about his character than I think he realized. There was no real acknowledgement of the pain he had caused, only concern for what he stood to lose. His family got involved next. His mother called tearfully, asking what had happened to make me leave so suddenly. It became clear that James had told them a heavily edited version of events, casting himself as surprised and confused by my actions. I calmly explained that James had been having an affair for over a year, and that they should ask him for details. The shocked silence that followed told me he hadn't expected me to be so direct. A week after the restaurant confrontation, I received an unexpected message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Melissa. She wanted to meet, said she had information I should know. Against Lauren's advice, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. Melissa was younger than she appeared in the photos, her face free of makeup, revealing her youth. She seemed nervous, clutching her cup with both hands as she explained that James had told her I was emotionally abusive, that we had been separated for nearly a year, but living together until finances could be sorted out. He had promised they would be together openly once the divorce was finalized, which he claimed was being delayed by my unreasonable demands. She showed me texts where he claimed to be meeting with divorce mediators when I knew he had been at work events with me. She had only learned the truth when she drove by our house the day after our anniversary dinner and saw movers, then discovered through social media that it was I who had left, not James, as he had claimed would happen. Melissa apologized repeatedly, insisted she would never have become involved with a married man, not already separated. I believed her. James had manipulated us both with precision, telling each of us exactly what we needed to hear to maintain his comfortable arrangement. We parted on surprisingly civil terms, two women who had been deceived by the same man, both now facing the task of rebuilding. Melissa mentioned she had already ended things with James, a small victory that gave me more satisfaction than I expected. The legal process moved forward methodically. Our first court appearance was clinical procedural. James arrived with his attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, who specialized in protecting high-earning men in divorces. He tried to catch my eye several times, but I kept my gaze forward or on Brian. The financial negotiations were where James revealed his true nature most clearly. He attempted to hide assets, underreport income, and overvalue my business to reduce potential support payments. Brian caught most of these maneuvers, but the process became increasingly adversarial. In the midst of legal battles, I had to maintain my business, keep working with clients, and present a professional face to the world. Some days it felt impossible. There were mornings I could barely get out of bed, afternoons I had to excuse myself from meetings to cry in restrooms. But gradually, the raw edges began to smooth. Friends chose sides as friends do in divorces. Some surprised me with their loyalty, others with their absence. Our couple friends mostly faded away, uncomfortable with the new dynamic. But individual friendships strengthened, especially with Amelia, who checked on me daily and forced me out of Lauren's guest house for regular dinners and movies. Social media became a minefield. I made no public statements about the divorce, but James's absence from my posts generated questions. I eventually posted a simple statement that James and I had separated and requested privacy, then muted the comments. Later, I would learn that James had posted his own version, painting himself as heartbroken but supportive of my decision to move in a different direction. The calculated manipulation of public perception was so typical that it almost made me laugh. 6 weeks after moving out, I returned to our house to collect seasonal items I had left behind. James was supposed to be at work, but his car was in the driveway. I almost left, but decided this confrontation would happen eventually. Better on my terms than his. He answered the door looking disheveled, a far cry from his usual polished appearance. The house was messier than I had ever allowed it to become. He seemed genuinely happy to see me, as if he had forgotten the circumstances of our separation. While gathering my winter clothes from the guest room closet, I found a woman's scarf I didn't recognize. Not Melissa's style based on the photos I had seen. Apparently, James had already moved on to someone new, or perhaps there had always been more women than I knew about. When I held up the scarf questioningly, James flushed and grabbed it, stuffing it in a drawer. That small moment told me everything I needed to know about the chances of his genuine remorse. While professing to want me back, he was already involving himself with someone else. Before leaving, I noticed our wedding album on the coffee table open to photos of our first dance. A calculated prop for my visit, no doubt. His attempts at manipulation had become so transparent that they no longer had any power over me. As the weeks passed, more details of James's double life emerged. A colleague mentioned seeing him with a woman at a restaurant in Cambridge months before Melissa entered the picture. The private investigator's deeper dive into financial records revealed patterns suggesting the affair with Melissa wasn't his first indiscretion, just the most serious. The divorce proceedings revealed other lies. James had been passed over for promotion twice, not elevated as he had claimed. The bonus he said was coming had been reduced due to performance issues. He had been borrowing from his 401k to maintain our lifestyle while funding his separate life with Melissa. When this information became known at his firm, James's professional reputation suffered. Several clients requested different advisors. The Henderson contract he had been so concerned about was reassigned to another team. The carefully constructed image he had maintained professionally began to crumble alongside his personal one. The early days after leaving James were physically painful. I would wake with a knot in my stomach, momentarily forgetting what had happened then, remembering in a rush that would leave me gasping. Food lost its taste. Sleep came in broken fragments. The world seemed muted somehow, colors less bright, sounds less clear. Dr. Reed explained this was a normal trauma response. The betrayal had fundamentally altered my sense of reality, making it difficult for my brain to process daily life while still integrating this new understanding of my past. She assured me that with time and proper support, these acute symptoms would fade. She was right. By week 3, I could eat a full meal again. By week 6, I could sleep through most nights. By month 3, I had moments where I forgot to think about James or the divorce for hours at a time, small victories that accumulated gradually. My sister Lauren was my rock during this period. Her guest house became my sanctuary, a place where I could heal without the constant reminders of my marriage. She knew when to push me to get dressed and face the day, and when to let me burrow under blankets and grieve. She fielded concerned calls from our parents, giving me space to tell them in my own time and my own way. I learned who my real friends were during this time. Amelia came by regularly with groceries and forced me on walks when all I wanted was to hide. My assistant Maria reorganized my client's schedule without being asked, creating space for me to recover while preserving key relationships. Even my accountant Thomas went above and beyond, helping untangle my finances from James's with patience and discretion. 4 months after leaving James, I was ready for my own place. I found a modern 1-bedroom apartment in a doorman building downtown, close to my studio and walking distance to my favorite bookstore. It was the first time I had ever lived completely alone, having gone from my parents' house to roommates to James. The freedom to design the space exactly as I wanted it was unexpectedly therapeutic. I painted the walls dark teal, a color James had always vetoed as too dramatic. I bought an impractical white sofa, arranged my books by color rather than author, played music at all hours. Small acts of reclaiming my identity that accumulated into a stronger sense of self. My design business, which I had feared might suffer during the divorce, actually thrived. Perhaps clients sensed my need for distraction and purpose. Perhaps the publicity of the divorce itself brought attention to my work. Or perhaps, as Dr. Reed suggested, I was finally channeling my full creative energy into my work rather than managing a failing marriage. I landed a major contract redesigning a boutique hotel, the kind of project I had always dreamed of but never pursued aggressively enough. The work was all-consuming in the best way, keeping my mind occupied and my confidence growing. When the project was featured in Architectural Digest, with my name prominently mentioned, I felt a surge of pride untainted by thoughts of James. The divorce was finalized 6 months after that night at La Maison. The financial settlement was fair thanks to Brian's aggressive advocacy and the evidence of James's misuse of marital assets. I kept my business entirely, received half of our investments and retirement accounts and a substantial cash settlement. James kept the house, which felt right. I had no desire to return to a space so filled with deception. The day the papers were signed, I took myself to dinner at an expensive restaurant I had always wanted to try. I ordered champagne and the tasting menu celebrating my freedom and the beginning of a new chapter. When the waiter asked if I was waiting for someone to join me, I smiled and said no, just celebrating. The pitying look I might have once received was instead appreciative, even admiring. Financial independence brought a security I hadn't realized I was missing in my marriage. My business accounts, my investments, my spending all controlled solely by me. No more justifying purchases, explaining client dinners, or worrying about supporting James's increasingly extravagant lifestyle while he diverted funds elsewhere. The first holiday season after the divorce was challenging. Thanksgiving at my parents' house with their well-meaning but sometimes clumsy attempts to avoid mentioning James. Christmas with Lauren and her husband, where an empty stocking made me cry unexpectedly. New Year's Eve spent working on designs rather than face the couple's centric celebrations. But gradually, the calendar of firsts passed. First birthday alone. First anniversary of our wedding date, spent purposely on a spa retreat Lauren gifted me. First spring without the traditions James and I had established over a decade together. Throughout this period, I continued my work with Dr. Reed. We moved from crisis management to deeper healing, examining patterns in my relationship with James that I had normalized. My tendency to accommodate, to make excuses, to prioritize peace over truth. The ways I had diminished myself to maintain the image of the perfect couple. I learned to trust my intuition again. The voice that had tried to warn me about James's behavior that I had repeatedly silenced and doubted became stronger. I practiced listening to it in small ways first, then larger ones, rebuilding the relationship with myself that had been damaged by years of gaslighting. An unexpected friendship developed during this time with Diane, another of Sandra Thompson's clients, who was going through a similar situation. Our shared experience created an instant bond, allowing conversations that even my closest friends couldn't fully understand. Diane was further along in her healing journey and became both inspiration and guide for navigating the emotional landscape of betrayal and recovery. When I finally felt ready to consider dating again nearly a year after leaving James, my first attempt was admittedly disastrous. A colleague set me up with her brother, a newly divorced architect, who spent the entire evening talking about his ex-wife. I left after an hour, simultaneously discouraged and relieved that I could recognize unhealthy patterns so quickly now. The journey toward forgiveness was perhaps the most challenging aspect of healing. Not forgiveness of James, though Dr. Reed suggested that might come in time, but forgiveness of myself. For not seeing the signs earlier, for allowing the deception to continue, for doubting my own perceptions when my intuition was screaming that something was wrong. This self-forgiveness came in stages. Some days I would feel compassion for my past self, understanding she had acted from love and commitment. Other days I would berate her naivety, her willingness to believe obvious lies. Gradually, the compassionate days outnumbered the critical ones, and I came to view my younger self with genuine tenderness. Surprisingly, some of James's family maintained contact after the divorce. His sister Emily, who had always been kind to me, reached out 6 months after the papers were signed. She apologized for her brother's behavior, assured me the family didn't condone his actions. We began a careful friendship separate from James based on the decade we had been family and the genuine affection that remained. As the 1-year anniversary of my discovery approached, I realized I had gone several days without thinking about James at all. When a mutual friend mentioned running into him, I felt curious rather than pained. When I drove past our old house, I noticed the new landscaping rather than feeling a surge of loss. Small markers of healing that accumulated until one day I recognized I had truly moved forward. The moment I knew I had healed came unexpectedly. I was at a gallery opening for a client whose home I had designed, enjoying the art and the conversation. Someone asked if I was seeing anyone, and I replied honestly that I was focusing on myself right now, but open to possibilities. There was no defensiveness in my answer, no underlying pain, just the simple truth of where I was in my life. Later that night, I realized that for the first time, I had defined myself not in relation to James or our marriage or the divorce, but simply as myself. Genevieve, designer, woman, whole and complete on my own. Looking back now, I can see that serving those divorce papers at La Maison wasn't just about creating a dramatic moment or getting revenge. It was about reclaiming my story, taking control of a narrative that James had been writing without my consent for over a year. It was the moment I decided that the rest of my life would be authored by me alone. The greatest lesson I learned through all of this was about self-worth, about recognizing that I deserved honesty, respect, and genuine love, that no relationship was better than one built on deception, that I had the strength to start over, to rebuild, to create a life that was authentically mine. Today, my design business is thriving. I've expanded to a team of 4 with projects across New England. I bought my own condo 6 months ago, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows and room for both my home and studio. I have real friendships, honest connections, and a renewed relationship with myself. I don't know if I'll marry again. I'm open to the possibility of love, but I no longer see partnership as the defining element of a successful life. I'm building a life I love, regardless of relationship status, creating success on my own terms. What would I tell others facing similar betrayal? Trust yourself. Document everything. Build your support team. Feel all your feelings. Take back your power in whatever way feels right to you. And know that there is life, joyful, authentic life, on the other side of heartbreak. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to reclaim your power in a relationship? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they too can survive betrayal and thrive afterward. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.